Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. We're in like Los Angeles and backyard television production right under a actual lemon tree, making actual lemonade. You know, when the markets give you lemons, it's time to make lemonade. Right, Stacy?
Certainly, the markets have given us a coronavirus and an epidemic, a pandemic. The pandemic that won't be called pandemic because that would require more QE. That is not QE, of course. So, you know, I do want to say, as you could probably tell, we've been in Mexico, we've been in Las Vegas, now we're in Los Angeles, out in the suburbs, where Brady Bunch was filmed. And the thing is that I noticed while traveling is how amazingly unprepared most people are. Basically, there's one very simple thing you have to remember is don't touch your face. Don't touch your face. It doesn't stop anybody. I see it all around me as we're traveling. Sneeze into their hand, then go to the toilet on the plane, open the door, and you're like, okay, there's everybody on this plane infected if you're infected. So it's so simple, but most people are also more simple than the simple coronavirus that is spreading and killing people.
Yeah, I've seen people trying to open doors with their cheeks, and that's also very unhygienic. Don't do that either.
You know, before it started to spread in the United States, we had Larry Kudlow, who is in the president's administration as the economic advisor, and he was saying that the coronavirus was contained and don't worry. And Secretary of State Pompeo also had this to say. Update, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Tuesday demanded that Iran tell the truth about the coronavirus outbreak in the country, voicing alarm at allegations of a cover-up. I want to particularly use that as an analogy for the rest of these headlines here because the Secretary of State, of course, presides over an empire of debt. And a lot of the lies started with covering up the stability, the fragility of all that debt over which we stand. So we're going to look at some headlines after that, but what do you think, Max, about what Secretary of State Pompeo said?
Look, I mean, what we've been saying on this show for a few years, probably all of 10 years, is that no problem has ever been put forward into the public consciousness that could not be solved with more money printing. Right? And no matter what happens, there's unrest somewhere, there's civil discord, you know, just print more money. Now we're asking ourselves, will the coronavirus be bigger than the ability to print money? Then what we've been seeing in the last few days is this idea from Christine Lagarde, she's now at the European Central Bank, or policymakers in Washington, D.C. They're asking themselves, should we print more money? How much more money do we need to print? So they're trying to battle a biological virus with fiat money. And of course, what we've been saying now for a few years now, and particularly in the last couple of weeks, is that a biological virus has no natural connection to fiat money. Doesn't make any sense. But these policymakers have grown accustomed to the idea that every single problem can be solved with money printing. Why can't we solve the coronavirus with money printing? The market now is starting to scratch its head a little bit and saying, wait a minute, that's insane. So therefore, valuations look like they're going to be marked down. We're already in correction territory on these markets, down 10%. Are we going to get to bear market valuations down 20%? Probably. I think the likelihood is extremely high. Are we going to have a 50 to 60% drop? That's probably a 10 to 20% probability, yeah.
Indeed, and by the time this airs, it may have been down 20 or 30% by that point. So, you know, we are here recording during the coronavirus apocalypse. One thing you know for sure after the apocalypse, not only will the cockroaches survive, but there will be leaf blowers always there blowing leaves, no matter what sort of chaos is happening around the world. You could hear them probably in the background here.
Well, what's really scary is when cockroaches are operating leaf blowers. That's when you know you've kind of the end game.
But back to the story that I was talking about of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo saying that the biological virus that we have of this coronavirus, you know, Iran covering it up was a bad story. Obviously it is. I think transparency is the best option. And transparency is the best option for the viral debts we have and the situation there. So I want to turn to a headline that probably got overlooked, and it did indeed get overlooked. But Jamie Dimon, we're watching you. We keep an eye on you, even during the apocalypse. JP Morgan plans to borrow funds through the Fed's emergency lending facility in an exercise designed to break the stigma attached to that program. Don't worry, folks. We're just doing this to break the stigma. We don't want to have people who who feel bad about having to go to the Fed's emergency borrowing window. We're just doing this for the good of everybody.
Right. There was virtually no cost for years of Jamie Dimon to take money from the central bank, from the Fed, but they did put it through some layers of denial. So they could say, well, it went through the primary dealers first, or there was some machination involved that was part of an economic policy that we're pursuing. It wasn't just a freebie. It wasn't socialism for Jamie Dimon. It wasn't a gift to Jamie Dimon. But they have destroyed all the money that's been given to JP Morgan. They're technically insolvent, right? They have probably 50, 60 times more debt than they have any book value or equity. So, but now Jamie Dimon is so desperate that he's just saying, you know, just drop the pretense. We're freaking starving to death from liquidity. If you don't give us more money right now, I'm going to do something really rash, like go on TV and run for president.
Well, in fact, Jamie Dimon could be likened, I believe, if we're talking about Iran and covering up coronavirus. Remember, the Vice Minister of Health was standing there speaking to the world, you know, to their state press, rubbing his nose. It was running the classic. There's two symptoms of coronavirus common across all nations: runny nose and sweating, fever. He's wiping off all the sweat and running his nose into his hand and then shaking hands. Jamie Dimon is that person right here saying, no, we're fine, where there is no coronavirus, there is no banking run gonna happen. No, we're all fine. We're just going to the emergency window just because we're happy. We just want everybody else to not have the stigma of being afraid to tell everybody they have coronavirus.
Right. Iran is a religious market fundamentalism versus a market fundamentalism of what Jamie Dimon's talking about. It's the cult of fiat money versus the cult of theocracy. And they're both two sides of the same coin. They're both in massive denial about their supposed superhuman strength to live somehow above the vagaries and contagion that represented by viruses. And in this case, you know, they're going to have the same outcome: total economic obliteration and the rise of Bitcoin.
It is quite fitting that we're out here in Los Angeles. Hollywood, of course, is the land of denial. You know, you've had many famous characters throughout history with as big a hair as mine today, you know, looking very Hollywood. And you know, the system of denial is not just in one country. It's not just in Iran, and it's here. And again, here's another tweet about this story. As JP Morgan was announcing that they're going to use the emergency window, just we're pre-announcing this because everything's fine, but we just want you to know we're going to use the emergency lending facility just to remove the stigma. JP Morgan executives say bank is big enough to weather any storm. So again, they're doubling down. They're letting you know. They're just like that Vice Minister of Health in Iran telling the people. He was literally saying there's no worry about coronavirus. It's not really here. It's not spreading in Iran, as he's like having an episode, a coronavirus episode, live on stage, and it's the same situation here.
Right. So it's like no problem. Again, it's a recurring theme. Right? Everything can be solved with money printing. Jamie Dimon believes that we're not yet at a crisis point where his ability to force and coerce the federal authorities, the central bank, treasury, et cetera, to print. We haven't gotten to that point yet. He's an entrenched oligopolist, and he has the ability to paper over every single mistake. And he doesn't feel like we've got, although I will point out that over the past couple of weeks, we've had an enormous purging of CEOs. If you look at these S&P 500 companies, there are an enormous amount of CEOs who have retired, like Bob Iger, Disney, and a bunch of others, because they're totally vested. They're running away with all the money now. They realize the end is upon us, and they're just running for the hills now.
My feeling about all of these lies is that it's part of our globalized system of, on the one hand, you have these just-in-time delivery, right? So the supermarket shelves are only stocked like to what their normal day is. And then they rely on like a steady stream of delivering exactly when it's going to be needed. That works great when things are fine. You know, the volatility formula of that has been fine. It's been steady. China's been delivering. There's been no disruptions. You know, everything is great until it's suddenly not. And I think that's part of the reason why China at first covered up, because they don't want, you know, being the supply chain for the world, the only supply chain for the world for many parts, has been good for them. And I think they recognize that, oh, if we have to shut down all these factories, other nations are going to realize they can't ever have this situation again in the future, and so they would be displaced. The same with this, the banking system. As we know, as we know with the repo market, by the way, it's just in time. The liquidity needed needs to be conjured up out of thin air every single night by the Fed.
Yeah, this is part 2 of the global financial crisis that started in 2008. And in 2008 was the white paper for Bitcoin, and in 2009 Bitcoin was launched, and now Bitcoin will experience part 2 of the global financial crisis. It's already close to $10,000 a coin. This is the global financial crisis that'll catapult the price to 100,000 and beyond. I changed my target from 100,000 to 400,000 to keep pace with gold. Gold is struggling because Jamie's got his thumb on the scale, doesn't he? All those banks, they know how to manipulate the price of gold, but Bitcoin is clear sailing all the way to 100,000 and beyond.
Well, speaking of Jamie Dimon, he's in this final headline, and it ties together with the fantasy and dreams and disreality and unreality and all that sort of stuff. Jamie Dimon had a dream that the coronavirus killed Davos attendees. He said, quote, "I had this nightmare that somehow in Davos, all of us who went there got it, and then we were all left and spread it. And the only good news from that is that it might have just killed the elite."
Right, he's confusing the coronavirus with the Bitcoin virus. Same thing with Peter Schiff. Their minds are being hacked by the protocol, by the Bitcoin virus. Soon Jamie Dimon will be a blathering idiot on the ground begging the Fed for money to buy Bitcoin. He is going to turn into a kind of a street urchin. Same with Peter Schiff.
Instead of Sunset Boulevard, it'll be Park Avenue, where he's babbling. And I want to say we're going to the second half, and the second half has an epic interview with Trace Mayer. Max, do you have anything final to say in the last 5 seconds here about Trace Mayer?
And so this is the last interview with Trace Mayer before he goes full Colonel Kurtz, completely off the reservation, a bit mad, and it's historic. Anyway, don't go away. Much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Trace Mayer, a Bitcoin OG. Trace, welcome back.
Oh, thanks so much, Max. It's good to be here.
Right. I was just thinking, if they were ever to create a Mount Rushmore of Bitcoin, you might be on that.
Yeah, Adam Back, Nick Szabo, Wei Dai. We've got lots of great contributors to this project.
So you really are one of the foundations of this whole industry, I must say. So, I have some questions here. Now, I was going to run through them, but I thought, let me ask you something. What do you want to talk about? You run the show because you're Trace Mayer. What is the most important thing that's happening right now in the Bitcoin space from your point of view?
I think we are entering a new era or a new stage with a lot of money and capital. Governments are learning to recognize this. Wyoming, we have the Speedy Bank regulation, the Special Purpose Depository Bank.
Let's talk about Wyoming, because you've been there with Kate Long.
Oh, yeah.
It's been an enormous initiative, and they are a state that wants to do for Bitcoin what Delaware did for the C Corp. They became the destination for corporations to incorporate, and that's a huge money flow for them. Wyoming, correct me if I'm wrong, but they see this, hey, this is our chance to be the go-to destination in America. Is that correct? And what's happening?
Yeah, Wyoming created the LLC, for example, and they are having to compete with New Mexico and Nevada and Delaware for that. These states, they have sovereignty, so they might as well sell it. That's their product, right? And so Wyoming's decided that they want to have property rights, and property rights with digital assets. So that, we've got 13 pieces of legislation that have been passed by the legislature, signed into law by the governor. So this is law of the land, passed by a sovereign, state of Wyoming, and it defines property rights. And we also have a special purpose depository bank that gets created, full-fledged bank. So under the Regal-Neal Act, you get these national bank powers, and you can custody digital assets. So, if a pension fund wants to invest in digital assets, how are they going to do it? If, the SEC, one of the big issues is custodianship on an ETF. How are you going to do it? You got to have property rights. Well, property rights are a state issue. So that you need to start defining the property rights in the legislation. And so that's what Wyoming's done. The way I've looked at it and why I've been so interested in it is, we have Bitcoin Core, we've got the network with all the proof of work behind it. It's a technical fortress that's just impenetrable. I want to build a legal fortress around the technical fortress. And so that's what we're doing. We're working on those types of bills to close attack surfaces and attack vectors from regulators, lawyers, attorneys, and anybody else who's trying to hack your Bitcoin through the legal system.
Right, right. So let's talk about this. The regulators and states are now coming out with their own crypto coins. The IMF is talking about they need a crypto coin. Mnuchin in Washington, D.C., I believe he's the Treasury Secretary. He's very vocal about his views on Bitcoin these days. So the people in the right places or the highest places are starting to respond, and then you have the corporations as well, with Facebook's coming out with their Libra coin. So suddenly Bitcoin is not alone. It's surrounded not only by the so-called altcoins, but now you've got regulators, you've got state actors, you've got central banks. Everybody now is jumped into the pool. Where are we in the game theory of all this? Because hard-coded in the Genesis block is this beautiful, balanced protocol where nobody's got an edge over anybody else, but the more you try to attack it, the stronger it gets. That's the honey badger. What you have
got my honey badger on.
Got the shirt on.
Don't have my suit on like usual.
Are we nearing an inflection point where states have to decide either A, we're going to fight and lose this battle, or we're going to join the battle? What do you think?
Yeah, remember back in 2014 we did the show, and you were asking me about the game theory with Russia and blockchain. And now we've got central bank digital currencies being actively talked about. We have some states wanting to issue them. We have the chairman of the Federal Reserve talking about this stuff. We have the Treasury Secretary, wanting to probably bring the hammer down when it comes to the travel rule. We got potential constitutional challenges on the bank.
Travel rule is what? Break that down.
Well, the travel rule is where you have to, when transactions are sent between two financial institutions, you have to attach personal information on sender and beneficiary, basically, which, Bitcoin Network doesn't care. It doesn't attach any of that to it. And so the Bank Secrecy Act is what requires a lot of that. And we have potential constitutional challenges to the Bank Secrecy Act. Caitlin's actually written an article on those potential challenges. So, it's going to be very interesting just seeing how all of this plays out. And really, you're going to make math illegal? You're going to make innovation illegal? What happens if all the Amazons and the Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitters get built in Beijing or Shanghai? What's that do for U.S. national security? Let alone the financial innovation. I mean, it's disrupting the largest part of the economy. I mean, the money is 50% of every transaction. This is a huge, huge deal that's going on. And we live in rehypothecation nation, right?
Well, to be clear, the rehypothecation nation is Great Britain, where
Yeah.
infinite rehypothecation is possible. But here it's pretty bad.
Well, and it's fiat currency. And they're all the dollar at the end of the day, just different heads if it's a British pound or a yen or whatever, because it's all, how Bretton Woods kind of set up the architecture of this stuff. And that's going away. Innovation has happened. We have something strictly limited amount that you come to distributed consensus on.
Right. You talk about the Cantillon effect. The money printing that goes on. It goes to asset buyers first, and then suddenly their assets worth a lot more than that rate of money printing that's going on, and they think actually that there's deflation because the cost that they're borrowing against their asset is a lot less to buy a bag of donuts than the guy down the pike, down the road, and when all this arrives at his doorstep, when it's 5 times the price that it was a month ago. So when you have
and it's a transfer of wealth.
Right.
And it's political currency being used for political benefit of different parties to the detriment of others.
Right, and it seems like it's also a reflection of an antiquated infrastructure. Because a lot of that distribution of money goes back to 200 years ago, 150 years ago, when that style of going to primary dealers, the primary dealers lending out to banks, et cetera. With blockchain, Bitcoin, you've got new money being created and distributed simultaneously on the chain to thousands of
every 10 minutes
nodes all over the world, right? That seems like hey man, that's a lot better than having the Federal Open Market Committee meet, decide where interest rates are going to go, being politically pressured by the president to do certain outcomes, and then the distribution model somehow always, without fail, ends up in a hedge fund's pocket who buys an apartment in Park Avenue for $200 million. I mean, it seems so obviously out of date and non-workable disaster on the financial infrastructure side.
Well, you know, they like their paper franchises. They're able to engage in confiscation through inflation. That's a form of taxation without representation or due process of law. They're able to erode the human rights and civil liberties of the individual and make these despotic inroads. And so they're able to transfer a bunch of wealth to themselves, all because of the use of political currency versus the monetary metals or commodity currency, which stands as a protector or a guarantee of these individual rights. And so that's really the issue. Are the people going to have choice and control over themselves and their money, or are they going to have that choice taken from them and imposed on them by political and financial elites? And it's a binary outcome, because we're now in a digital age with zeros and ones. You know, and antiquated infrastructure, wire transfers. What's that come from? Telegraph, wire telegraph along the railroad. I mean, this is ancient technology almost.
Well,
we don't need it anymore. We can innovate.
This binary outcome, you know, reminds me, give me liberty, give me death.
Right.
I mean, there comes a point in time when a population has to decide if they want to move forward as free individuals, sovereign individuals, or succumb to the state. And are we at an inflection point in the United States and elsewhere around the world where we're going to come to kind of a conflict, if you will, between those who want to impose their will of getting rid of our rights?
Well, the conflict has been simmering under the surface for well over a decade in the open since the financial crisis. It's erupted into protests all over the world. Hong Kong, Chile, you name it, people are protesting. And the critical question gets posed: repression or regeneration? Which route are we going to go? And if you go down the repression route, which it seems like Munchin, that's what he wants to do, right? Let's come down with the iron fist. Well, how did that work in history? Well, you had the French assignat, and they made it illegal under pain of death to use gold and silver. But there were shortages of food. And the response were the guillotines, with tens of thousands of political elites like losing their heads, like done, right? And then you got Robespierre. So the French like just kind of traded one for the other. But the U.S., you know, you had these general writs of assistance. You know, check this box on your tax return. Put all this information on here, and we just get to engage in all types of warrantless surveillance. It was these general writs of assistance that just inflamed the American people in order to collect the different taxes and stuff. And how did the American people respond? You had the Constitutional Revolution, you had the Declaration of Independence, and then you had the Bill of Rights, you know, unreasonable searches and seizures, and then you had the 1792 Coinage Act. And in Section 19, what did they put in there? Anybody who's a employee of the federal government in the mint that debases or makes worse the currency shall be guilty of a felony and shall suffer death. It used to be U.S. law to get death as a penalty when you're a government employee tinkering with the money to debase or make it worse.
Is this or is this not the primary reason Satoshi is anonymous?
Yeah, probably. I mean, like, this is a powder keg, right? Because, like, it's the money. What Martin Luther King, the marches were great, right? The marches were great. But what really changed stuff were the boycotts. The boycotts hit them in the pocketbook, right? That's what really begins to change stuff, is when you change the economics and you change the money and you change where the cash is flowing.
Same thing with Gandhi, right? They would march to the sea, make salt, hit the empire. And you know, we talked about Russia, as you mentioned, in 2014 and what this could mean to different countries at the time. 2020, I think, is going to be the year of Latin America, South America. We just went through Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Venezuela. Right, these are countries where the adoption rate of Bitcoin, which is readily available now, is skyrocketing. In Argentina, it's off the charts. We just got in Buenos Aires, people are in Mexico City. You know, by the way, you're well known in Mexico City. You know, there's Andreas Antonopoulos and Trace Mayer. Those are the two, the saints of this movement in Mexico City. And do you see that? I mean, this is a way for them to get out of this fiat misery.
Yeah, no, so I've gone to pretty much all of the Latin American Bitcoin conferences, went to the first, went to the second, you know, Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Mexico City, Bogota, Colombia, Santiago, Chile. I've made probably at least 20 or 30 trips down to South America to help educate and bring Bitcoin, going back all the way to early 2011. Because, you know, South America is such a powerhouse in terms of natural resources and everything that they've got, and yet they have imposed on them antique communication systems and like archaic financial infrastructure.
Right.
They could have so much wealth generation if they had real ones.
They get it. We're down there. They get it. This is where the revolution is going to happen. Trace Mayer, thanks for being once again on the Keiser Report.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Trace Mayer. If you want to catch us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.